careful with the silk, your grace. Look at her, how the mighty fall.
On the morning Duchess Evelyn Ashford knelt to fasten another woman's shoe, she understood, at last, that her marriage had never truly been a marriage at all. It had been a duty, a transaction, a promise between dead men and living families. And now in the middle of her husband's drawing room, before a circle of whispering guests, and a woman who had once owned the Duke's heart, Evelyn was being asked to perform the final humiliation of a wife who had never once been loved. But the cruelty of that moment had begun long before Lady Beatrice Langley returned to Ashford Manor. It had begun on Evelyn's wedding day. When Evelyn Hart married Duke Adrian Ashford, she did so with a calm face and a breaking heart. Though neither emotion had anything to do with her father had died the previous winter after a long illness that left the Hart family buried in debt. Their once respectable estate nearly stripped of everything but its name. Her mother had followed him into the grave only months later, leaving Evelyn with a younger brother at school, a mountain of unpaid bills, and a crumbling family house she had no hope of saving alone. By then Adrian Ashford had already arrived with his late father's promise hanging over both of them like a chain. Years earlier, when the old Duke had fallen gravely ill during a hunting accident, it had been Evelyn's father who found him half-conscious in the woods and carried him home through a storm that nearly killed them both. The Duke survived. Mr. Hart ruined his health in the process. From that day on, the Ashfords considered themselves indebted to the Hart family, and though Evelyn's father had never once tried to collect on that debt, the old Duke never forgot it. Before his death, he had made Adrian swear that if the Harts ever fell into ruin, he would do whatever was necessary to protect them. Adrian kept that promise in the coldest way possible. He offered Evelyn marriage. Not love. Not companionship. Not even the pretense of either. Just marriage. A title. Financial protection. Her family's debts paid in full. Her younger brother's schooling secured. In return, Evelyn would become Duchess of Ashford and conduct herself with dignity beside a man who had made it clear with painful courtesy that he was marrying her because honor demanded it and because he had no desire to break his father's final wish. Evelyn said yes because she had no other choice. She had not entered the chapel expecting affection. She had not dreamed of soft glances, warm hands, or a future shaped by mutual tenderness. She knew perfectly well that Adrian Ashford had once loved another woman and that the ghost of that woman still lived somewhere in the quiet, locked places of his heart. Society had not been discreet about it. Years earlier, before duty and grief had hardened him into the Duke he had become, Adrian had been expected to marry Lady Beatrice Langley, a beautiful, reckless darling of London society who had vanished almost overnight after choosing a wealthier man with a better title and fewer burdens. Adrian had never spoken of her to Evelyn, but he didn't need to. Some names continue to haunt a house even when no one says them aloud. Ashford Manor felt haunted from the first day Evelyn arrived. It was magnificent in the way old ducal homes often are, with towering stone walls and sweeping staircases, and portraits of severe-faced ancestors watching from gilded frames. But beneath its grandeur lay a silence so complete it seemed to swallow warmth whole. The servants were respectful. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pembroke, was kind in a careful, restrained way. Adrian's mother, Lady Eleanor, treated Evelyn with impeccable politeness and the unmistakable disappointment of a woman who had once imagined a different bride for her son. Yet no one in the house seemed cruel. That was what made it so lonely. There was no open hostility to resist, no insult sharp enough to wound cleanly. There was only the endless quiet knowledge that Evelyn had been placed inside a life that did not truly want her. Adrian himself remained unfailingly courteous. He made sure the family debts were paid exactly as promised. He asked after her brother's schooling. He never raised his voice, never embarrassed her in public, never denied her anything a duchess might reasonably request. But he was distant in a way that made kindness feel colder than indifference. He dined with her when necessary, spoke with her when duty required it, and slept in a separate wing of the house under the excuse of late estate business so often that eventually the servants stopped pretending not to notice. He treated her less like a wife and more like a duty he intended to fulfill with precision and as little emotional complication as possible. For the first few months, Evelyn told herself that was enough. If Adrian did not love her, she would at least be useful. She learned the rhythms of Ashford Manor, the names of the servants, the condition of the tenant cottages, the weaknesses in the household accounts. She discovered that one of the dairy farms had been losing money for months because a dishonest steward was falsifying deliveries. She quietly corrected it. She learned that several tenant families had gone without coal during a harsh spell of weather because the estate office had mishandled winter orders. She corrected that too. She sat with Lady Eleanor's elderly maid when the woman developed a fever and had no family to comfort her. She repaired broken relationships between the kitchen and house staff that had been simmering for years. Slowly, almost invisibly, she began doing what women like her have always done in great houses built by men. She held together the things no one else noticed were fraying. Adrian noticed none of it. Or if he did, he never said so. At times, Evelyn thought that hurt more than outright cruelty would have. Cruelty at least acknowledges your existence. Adrian often seemed to look through her as though she were a graceful and necessary object placed in the correct room of his life. And then, in early spring, Lady Beatrice Langley returned. She arrived at Ashford Manor on a rain-heavy evening just after dusk, stepping from a hired carriage. In a dark travelling cloak, pale and beautiful, trembling with exactly the right amount of distress. By the time Evelyn came downstairs at the sound of raised voices in the entrance hall, Adrian was already standing before Beatrice with an expression Evelyn had never once seen directed at her. It was not joy, not quite shock, certainly confusion. Something deeper beneath both, something like an old wound suddenly remembering how to bleed. Beatrice looked as lovely as rumour had always promised, though loveliness had sharpened into something more dangerous with time. Her golden hair was hidden beneath a damp bonnet, her blue eyes wide with practiced vulnerability, and even standing in a puddle of rainwater on Ashford's marble floor, she looked less like a woman seeking refuge than a memory come to life. She said the fortune she had married for had vanished with him, leaving her with debts, false friends, and nowhere respectable to go. She said she had no right to ask for help, but there had been a time when Adrian once called her family, and she had not known where else to turn. Evelyn watched all of this in silence from the staircase landing, one hand resting lightly on the banister while something cold and instinctive moved through her chest. It was not jealousy, not at first. Jealousy implies surprise. Evelyn had always known there was a part of Adrian's life into which she had never been invited and never would be. What she felt now was something simpler and more dangerous, certainty. She knew before Adrian even turned toward the servants and ordered a guest room prepared that Lady Beatrice Langley was not merely passing through Ashford Manor. She was coming to reclaim space. And Adrian, God help them both, was about to let her. Beatrice remained for a week, then another. By the third week, Ashford Manor no longer felt like Evelyn's home at all. Adrian had given Beatrice the blue guest suite overlooking the south gardens, the warmest room on that side of the house. He invited her to breakfast, rode with her in the afternoons, sat beside her after dinner while she played the pianoforte and spoke of London, old friends, and long ago summers Evelyn had never shared. None of it was improper, at least not enough to challenge openly, but every day brought some new small displacement. At luncheon, Beatrice occupied the chair beside Adrian that had once been Evelyn's. During a musicale held for neighbouring guests, it was Beatrice Adrian escorted into the drawing room while Evelyn followed with Lady Eleanor. When flowers arrived from a family friend in town, the note attached addressed them to Lady Beatrice with relief at hearing of your safe return to Ashford. Safe return. As though she belonged there. The house began to whisper. Servants grew careful whenever Evelyn entered a room. Visiting ladies lowered their voices when Beatrice smiled too brightly at Adrian over tea. Even Lady Eleanor, who clearly disliked Beatrice on instinct, said nothing perhaps because she had once preferred Beatrice as a match for her son and could not now object without exposing her own past hopes. Evelyn endured it all with the composure expected of a duchess, though every day required a little more strength than the last. What Adrian did not see, because he was not looking, was how cleverly Beatrice arranged each small humiliation. A forgotten invitation sent through Evelyn rather than to her. A silk shawl left draped across Adrian's library chair where Evelyn would notice it. A careless remark at dinner about how comforting it was to be in a house that still felt familiar. After so many years away. Always soft. Always deniable. Never enough to make Evelyn seem anything but petty if she objected. Then came the first accusation. It happened over something trivial, a sapphire bracelet Beatrice claimed had gone missing after tea. She searched her rooms with theatrical distress, rang for maids, and finally with trembling grace apologized for the trouble before saying she feared the bracelet might have been misplaced after Evelyn had visited earlier that afternoon. It was a lie. Evelyn had never set foot in Beatrice's room, but by the time Adrian was called into the matter, Beatrice had already begun to cry. I am sure it is only a misunderstanding, she whispered, seated delicately on the sofa while Adrian stood beside her. Her Grace has been so patient with me. I would hate to think my presence here has caused an invitation for Adrian to draw his own conclusions. Evelyn stood opposite them in the drawing room and felt with terrible clarity the moment Adrian chose whom to believe. His expression hardened. Not with outrage. With disappointment. That hurt far more. You might have handled this more graciously, Evelyn, he said. She stared at him. The bracelet was found less than an hour later in the pocket of one of Beatrice's own travelling cloaks, exactly where it had been hidden from the beginning. Beatrice laughed through fresh tears and blamed her own carelessness. Adrian offered no apology to his wife. After that, Beatrice grew bolder. She began summoning servants only to complain that no one understood her preferences the way they once had. She spoke wistfully of the years before Evelyn's marriage, of the roses Adrian used to send her, of the summer house near the lake where they had once spent entire afternoons together. Sometimes she did this directly in front of Evelyn. Sometimes she did it as though forgetting Evelyn was there. Adrian never stopped her. Whether he failed to notice the malice beneath the sweetness or simply lacked the courage to confront it, Evelyn could not tell. Then came the afternoon that broke whatever remained of her illusions. Ashford Manor was hosting a small tea for several neighbouring ladies, nothing grand, only enough to fill the drawing room with silk, perfume, and the kind of soft social warfare that thrives in aristocratic houses. Evelyn had spent the morning overseeing the arrangements herself, partly because Beatrice had complained the previous evening that Ashford's tea service was never prepared the way she liked it, and partly because Evelyn had learned the safest way to preserve dignity was to leave as little room for Beatrice's interference as possible. It did not matter. Halfway through the gathering, Beatrice gave a faint cry and rose from the sofa, staring down at the hem of her pale lilac gown where tea had splashed across the silk. It was not much. A few drops at most. Yet she looked at the stain as though someone had thrown acid over her. "Oh dear," she said, pressing a hand to her throat. "What a disaster. I have nothing suitable to change into before dinner." Her gaze moved instead to Evelyn with exquisite softness. "Your Grace," she said, "would you be terribly kind and help me upstairs? Always trusted your taste." Evelyn knew exactly what Beatrice was doing. So did at least half the women present. A duchess did not assist a guest in changing clothes. A duchess certainly did not act as maid to the woman half the county already suspected held her husband's affection. Evelyn opened her mouth to refuse. Adrian entered the room before she could speak. He had been returning from the stables and still wore his riding coat, dark hair wind-touched, gloves in one hand. His gaze moved first to Beatrice's stained gown, then to the frozen silence in the room, then to Evelyn. Beatrice gave him a helpless little smile. "I only asked her Grace for a small kindness." Then he said in a voice calm enough to destroy her, "If Lady Beatrice is uncomfortable under my roof, you will see to her comfort yourself." Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. Adrian, perhaps sensing the shock but mistaking its source, continued with quiet authority. "Take her upstairs. Help her change. I will not have a guest embarrassed in this house." As though Evelyn were not his wife. As though the greater embarrassment belonged to Beatrice and not to the duchess he was ordering before. A room full of watching eyes to serve the woman who had once promised to marry him. Beatrice lowered her lashes to hide her triumph. Evelyn said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not make her look desperate, jealous, or small. So with every eye in the room fixed upon her, she stepped forward and followed Beatrice from the drawing room in silence. Upstairs, the humiliation only deepened. Beatrice stood before the mirror while Evelyn unfastened the stained gown with steady hands she no longer felt attached to. She selected a fresh dress from the wardrobe, smoothed the silk over Beatrice's shoulders, buttoned the back. Then just when Evelyn thought the ordeal was over, Beatrice sat in the dressing chair and extended one delicate foot toward her. "The buckle, if you please." For a moment, she did not move. Beatrice met her gaze in the mirror and smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who had waited years for this exact victory. So Evelyn, Duchess of Ashford, bent to her knees before her husband's former lover, and fastened the silver buckle with fingers so cold they barely obeyed her. Outside the half-open dressing room door, unseen by either woman, a servant girl stood frozen in horror. And somewhere downstairs in the house, Adrian Ashford remained entirely unaware of the full depth of the humiliation he had just ordered his wife to endure. If Adrian Ashford felt any shame for what he had done that afternoon, he hid it well. He did not come to Evelyn's rooms that night. He did not send a message, offer an explanation, or even ask whether Beatrice's dress had been changed without further trouble. At dinner, he behaved as though nothing unusual had occurred, speaking to his mother about estate matters and to Beatrice about some trivial scandal from London, while Evelyn sat opposite him in perfect silence, her back straight, her expression serene, and the taste of humiliation still lodged in her throat like something poisonous she could neither swallow nor spit out. That was the night Evelyn understood that if she remained at Ashford Manor, she would have to stop expecting rescue from her husband. So she did. From the following morning onward, she withdrew into a stillness so controlled that even Adrian seemed uncertain what to do with it. Evelyn no longer attempted conversation. She no longer looked at him as though hoping, however foolishly, to find traces of the man she had once imagined might eventually soften. She attended breakfast, oversaw the household, fulfilled every duty expected of a duchess and gave Adrian nothing beyond courtesy. If Beatrice summoned her for some invented inconvenience, Evelyn answered without complaint. If Adrian stood by and watched, she lowered her eyes and endured it. To anyone else, it might have looked like submission. In truth, it was survival. Because by then, Evelyn had discovered two things that changed the shape of her silence. The first was that she was carrying Adrian's child. The physician had confirmed it only days after the tea-room humiliation when Mrs. Pembroke, alarmed by Evelyn's sudden dizziness and constant exhaustion, quietly arranged for the village doctor to visit under the excuse of a headache. The news should have brought joy. Instead, it filled Evelyn with a grief so sharp she could barely breathe around it. A child, Adrian's child. A small innocent life growing inside her at the precise moment her husband was publicly humiliating her for the comfort of another woman. She had sat very still while the physician spoke, one hand resting over her abdomen as if her Body already understood what her heart could not. When the doctor left, she said nothing to anyone. Not to Lady Eleanor. Not to Mrs. Pembroke. Certainly not to Adrian. She could not bear the thought of him learning about the baby while Beatrice still occupied his attention. Still walked freely through Ashford Manor with the ease of a woman testing whether she could reclaim it entirely. Evelyn refused to place her child into a household where its existence might become another obligation Adrian resented, another chain laid across a life he had never chosen. If he were ever to know, it would not be because duty forced him to act the part of a father. While his heart remained elsewhere. The second discovery was in some ways even worse. Ashford Manor was in serious financial danger. Evelyn found the truth by accident in Adrian's study while searching for a tenant lease. He had asked Mrs. Pembroke to locate. Hidden among estate correspondence was a packet of letters from London solicitors. Several months old, marked urgent and left unanswered. At first, she meant only to sort them for Adrian's convenience. Then she began to read. By the third letter, her hands had gone cold. A disastrous land investment made in the final years of the old Duke's life had left Ashford entangled in a debt far larger than Adrian seemed to realize. Payments had been delayed. Interest was mounting. If the matter became public, part of the estate could be seized or forced into sale. Worse still, the timing could not have been more dangerous. Ashford's standing in Parliament and in the county depended heavily on the appearance of strength. One public scandal, financial weakness, domestic disgrace, or both, and the family's influence would begin to fracture. Evelyn sat alone in Adrian's study long after sunset with those letters spread before her and understood with exhausted clarity why she could not afford to leave yet. If she walked out in humiliation while Beatrice remained under the same roof as the Duke, the scandal would spread within days. If at the same time Ashford's financial instability came to light, the damage might be irreversible. Adrian did not know it, but his house was standing on rotting beams. So Evelyn made a decision that would later seem almost absurd even to herself. She would save Ashford Manor before she left it. From that day on, she lived two lives inside the same house. By daylight, she was the silent duchess whom Adrian had taught everyone to overlook. By night, she became the one person quietly trying to prevent his estate from collapsing around him. She reviewed ledgers in secret, wrote careful letters to the solicitors in London, met with the estate steward under the pretense of charity work and uncovered expenses that had been buried or misreported. When the numbers still refused to balance, she unlocked the small jewel case containing the last pieces of her mother's inheritance and chose with shaking hands which of them could be sold without attracting immediate notice. The sapphire pendant went first. Then the pearl earrings her mother had worn at her own wedding. Evelyn parted with them all in silence and sent the money through an intermediary to cover the most urgent payments before the solicitors could take formal action. Adrian knew none of it. He knew only that his wife had become quieter, thinner, and far too pale. At first, he blamed Beatrice's presence for the strain between them, though even that explanation no longer satisfied him. Something had changed in Evelyn after the tea room incident, something beyond wounded pride. She moved through the house like a woman carrying pain too heavy to set down, and despite himself, Adrian began to notice the details he had once ignored. The shadows beneath her eyes. The way she pressed her hand to the edge of a table whenever she rose too quickly. The fact that she was eating almost nothing at dinner and leaving the room early more often than not. Twice he found her alone in the library after midnight, with account books spread across her lap. Twice she closed them before he could see what she was reading. "Why are you exhausting yourself with estate records?" he asked the second time, irritation sharpened by a concern he did not wish to examine. Evelyn met his gaze with maddening calm. "Because someone ought to. If there is some problem, you may speak plainly. If there were a problem you wish to hear plainly, Your Grace, I imagine you would already know of it." She gathered the ledgers and left him, standing alone in the library with the distinct and infuriating sense that he had just been rebuked by a woman too tired to care whether he noticed. Meanwhile, Beatrice was becoming careless. Perhaps she sensed Adrian beginning to drift away from the easy spell she had once cast over him. Perhaps cruelty, like vanity, simply grows bolder when it goes unpunished. Whatever the reason, her small humiliations became sharper. She sent for Evelyn at unreasonable hours to choose ribbons and gloves. Complained to Adrian that the servants no longer remembered how she liked her tea and then sweetly suggested that Evelyn might show them herself. Once when Lady Eleanor was present, she laughed and said it was fortunate Evelyn had such a practical nature because she wore the role of hostess far more comfortably than the role of wife. Lady Eleanor's expression had turned to ice. Adrian said nothing. Yet cracks were beginning to form in his blindness. He noticed that Beatrice never seemed weak except when he entered the room. He noticed the sly satisfaction that flickered across her face whenever Evelyn was forced into some fresh indignity. Most of all, he noticed that while Beatrice took from Ashford with effortless entitlement, Evelyn seemed to be giving something of herself away piece by piece, and he could not understand why. The answer came in fragments. A jeweller's receipt found by accident inside a discarded envelope on Evelyn's desk. A conversation overheard between Mrs. Pembroke and the steward about a payment made anonymously to settle part of Ashford's outstanding debt. A letter from London addressed not to Adrian but to the Duchess thanking her for the latest arrangement and assuring her that if the remaining sum could be met within the month, the matter might yet be kept out of court. Adrian read the letter twice before its meaning settled over him. Then he went very still. Evelyn had been handling Ashford's debts. Evelyn had sold her own jewels to do it. And all the while, he had allowed Beatrice to treat her like a servant under his own roof. The realization hit him with such brutal force that he could do nothing but stand there for several seconds. In his study, the letter shook in his hand as every recent memory rearranged itself into something ugly and unforgivable. Her exhaustion. The ledgers. The midnight work. The way her gowns had become simpler over the last few weeks. He had seen every sign and chosen not to ask the right questions. He went looking for her immediately. She was waiting outside the morning room, tears already gathering in her eyes, saying that Evelyn had been terribly rude, that she had only tried to thank the Duchess for her patience and had been met with shocking coldness. Under ordinary circumstances, Adrian might have listened. This time, for the first time in months, he heard the false note beneath the tremor in her voice. "Where is my wife?" he asked. Beatrice blinked. "In the west corridor, I think." He found Evelyn near the top of the back staircase, one hand gripping the banister. Her face white with exhaustion. She had clearly been on her way to her room, and the sight of Adrian striding toward her with anger in his eyes made her stop short. "What have you done?" he demanded, holding up the letter. Evelyn's gaze fell to the paper, and for one brief second, real fear crossed her face. So it was true. Adrian took another step. "You sold your jewels. You've been paying Ashford's debts behind my back." "Why?" "Because someone had to. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have strength left to give you." Before Adrian could respond, Beatrice appeared behind him, breathless and wide-eyed, no doubt drawn by the raised voices. Her gaze flicked from the letter in Adrian's hand to Evelyn's exhausted face, and something calculating hardened beneath her panic. She understood, perhaps instantly, that the balance had shifted. Adrian had learned too much. Evelyn had become dangerous again. "What is all this?" Beatrice asked softly. Neither of them answered. Then her eyes dropped just for a moment to the protective way Evelyn's hand had moved across her abdomen. The smallest movement. Barely visible. But Beatrice saw it. And in that instant, Evelyn knew she understood everything. Beatrice's expression changed. Not visibly enough for Adrian to catch it. But Evelyn saw the hatred flash through her eyes before it vanished beneath a mask of distress. "You lied to him," Beatrice whispered. Evelyn straightened despite the dizziness pressing at her temples. "Go back to your room. You think a child will save you now?" "What child?" Evelyn closed her eyes for 1 second, too tired to lie, too heartsick to speak. Beatrice realized her mistake too late. Panic overtook calculation. She reached for Adrian's arm, speaking too quickly, too desperately, trying to explain. To twist the moment back in her favor. But Evelyn stepped away from them both, her hand tightening on the banister as a wave of pain cut through her. Everything after that happened in seconds as Beatrice caught Evelyn's wrist. Perhaps she only meant to stop her from leaving. Perhaps she meant worse. Evelyn pulled back. Beatrice shoved. It wasn't hard. It didn't need to be. Evelyn had been exhausted for weeks, half-starved, and standing too close to the staircase. Her foot slipped against the polished edge of the step, and Adrian had just enough time to see. Her face changed from anger to shock before she fell. She struck the stairs once, then again. By the time Adrian reached her, she was crumpled at the bottom of the landing, one hand curled protectively over her stomach, blood staining the pale silk of her dress. For one terrible second, the entire world went silent. Then Adrian dropped to his knees beside his wife, his hands shaking as he gathered her into his arms. "Evelyn." Beatrice stood frozen above them, one hand over her mouth. Adrian looked up at her with a face so cold it no longer seemed human. "Get out," he said. The words were quiet. That made them more terrifying. "If you are still in this house when my wife wakes, I will have you dragged from it." Then he turned back to Evelyn, pressing trembling fingers to the blood at her waist, and for the first time in his life, Duke Adrian Ashford understood the full horror of what it meant to realize the truth too late. Evelyn did not wake until the following afternoon. By then, Beatrice was gone. Adrian had seen to that himself. Before the physician had even finished examining Evelyn, he ordered Beatrice's trunks packed, her carriage prepared, and every servant in Ashford Manor informed that Lady Beatrice Langley was never to set foot inside the house again. He did not allow her tears, her excuses, or her trembling claims that she had not meant for Evelyn to fall. Adrian had watched too much already, ignored too much already, and the sight of Evelyn lying pale and unconscious in their bed with blood on her dress had burned away whatever remained of his old weakness. The physician's verdict was merciful only in part. Evelyn would live. The child, against all reason, still lived as well. But she had been pushed to the edge of collapse long before the fall. Exhaustion. Stress, too little food, too many sleepless nights. The physician spoke carefully, yet every word struck Adrian like a public sentence. Evelyn had not nearly lost the baby because of one moment on the stairs alone. She had been slowly worn down for weeks while he stood in the same house and failed to see what was happening to her. When the physician left, Adrian remained beside Evelyn's bed through the night with the estate letters, the jeweller's receipts, and the evidence of her sacrifices spread across the table like an indictment. He learned everything before dawn. The debts she had paid in secret. The jewels she had sold to keep Ashford from scandal. The letters she had written to protect his estate while he spent his time protecting the wrong woman. And beneath all of it lay the final unbearable truth: Evelyn had done all of this while carrying his child and enduring humiliations no wife should ever have suffered. By morning, Adrian no longer knew which shame burned more. That he had forced her to serve Beatrice. Or that Evelyn had still chosen to save Ashford Manor afterward. When she finally opened her eyes, he was there. For one fragile second, Evelyn looked confused as though she did not understand why Adrian was seated beside her bed with the face of a man who had not slept. Then memory returned, and with it came a flicker of fear so sharp that Adrian nearly hated himself all over again. "The baby," she whispered. Adrian leaned forward at once. "Alive. You both are." He should have apologized, confessed, begged. Instead, he sat there in silence, watching the woman he had failed in every possible way. And realized there were no words large enough for what he had done. At last, he said the only truth that mattered. "I know everything. The letters." His voice was rough with exhaustion. "You were saving Ashford while I was too blind to understand what was happening under my own roof. I did not do it for you," she said quietly. "I did it because scandal would have destroyed the estate. And because I would not let my child be born into ruins if I could help it. I know." That he had read the letters. That he knew she had sold her mother's jewels. That he knew the child existed because Beatrice had thrown the truth at him only moments before pushing her down the stairs. Through all of it, Evelyn remained silent, one hand resting protectively over the life inside her. As though that small, fragile heartbeat was now the only thing in the room she trusted. "I was wrong about everything," Adrian said at last. "About Beatrice. About you. About the kind of man I thought I was. You made me feel invisible in my own marriage. You let another woman use your name to strip me of every piece of dignity I had left, and each time I looked to you, you were standing beside her. There was nothing to say except the truth. I know. I cannot forgive that because you suddenly regret it. I am not asking for sudden forgiveness." "Then what are you asking for?" Adrian stood from the chair, crossed the room, and lowered himself to his knees beside the bed. It was the first time Evelyn had ever seen him kneel. "A chance," he said. "Not because of the child. Not because of duty. Because I love you, and I was too much of a coward to understand it before I nearly lost you. If you tell me to leave this room, I will. If you tell me you never wish to return to Ashford, I will make sure you are protected wherever you choose to go. But if there is any part of you that can still imagine a future in which I become a man you do not despise, let me spend the rest of my life earning it." For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. Then quietly, "I will not return to Ashford with you now." "All right. Then you will begin by learning how to put me first when it matters." "I will." Adrian did not try to stop her. This time he packed her things himself, settled every remaining debt she had been forced to shoulder, and watched the carriage disappear. With the knowledge that love, if it meant anything at all, sometimes required letting the injured heart choose the distance it needed. He visited Luce's house every week after that. Not always for long. Sometimes only to bring medical supplies, letters from the physician, or the books Evelyn liked and pretended not to miss. Sometimes she allowed him inside. Sometimes she did not. But Adrian came anyway. Quietly, consistently. Without demanding more than she was ready to give. When their son was born in the first days of winter, Adrian was waiting outside the bedchamber door like a man awaiting judgment. Lucy placed the child in his arms only after making him promise not to become insufferable about it. Adrian laughed for the first time in months, then nearly broke apart when he looked down and saw Evelyn's eyes in the face of his son. It was not until spring that Evelyn agreed to return to Ashford Manor. Not because the house had changed. Because Adrian had. He met her at the front steps without ceremony, took her hand as though it were something precious. Rather than promised, and said quietly, "No one in this house will ever make you feel small again. Least of all me." This time, when Evelyn crossed the threshold, she did so not as a duchess tolerated by duty, but as the woman Adrian had finally learned to love openly, honor properly, and keep without conditions. And for the rest of his life, he never forgot how close he had come to losing her through his own blindness.